So I should start by saying that when I was first asked to come here, it was to do, excuse me, a workshop. So the idea is that we would have a couple hours of time and we would learn how to set up WooCommerce API, how to do some custom endpoints, and then plug that in with some different JavaScript charting libraries. Now, the shift happened to more of a 50-minute breakout session, which sadly, no code. So if you were expecting to come out of here with a full D3 visualization hooked up to your site, may not happen. But I am excited because we're going to be able to talk about a lot wider variety of things that apply to data visualization with WooCommerce, with WordPress, with JavaScript, and beyond. So as was mentioned, my background is in education. And since Matt said, go learn JavaScript deeply, well, I've been teaching JavaScript deeply. So this stuff is right up my alley, and I was really excited to get to work with a lot of shiny charts and pretty things. And then there's the whole topic of data visualization. So this was, in some ways, some excuse for me to dig deeper, but also in running my online course, there's a lot of data that I'm trying to sort through that relates to student learning, that relates to signups, marketing, all of these things that touch a lot of what all of us do. So I'll share a little bit of personal stuff in here, but I'm also going to try to keep it at a big picture. Now, the other thing I want to do is keep a little bit of the workshop vibe because that interaction is good. So let's try this first. Everybody, just go ahead and wave to everybody else here. Even introverts could do it. Cool. All right. So you now know everybody else in the room. So if in the future you want to go strike up a conversation on data visualization, let's say, you know everybody. You should feel comfortable doing that. Now, let's keep this going. Raise your hand for me if in some way with your work you use visualized data or you would like to. Go ahead and raise your hand. Hold them up. Look around the room. Other good people to talk with. So I'm going to start off with this quote that says, how can you see your data if you can't see it? Right? It's kind of redundant, and the wording's a little bit silly, but the point is very valid, and this is where all data visualization starts. And I'd almost argue that you can't think of data without even visualizing it, right? Even mentally. So at some level, we're always doing some sort of data visualization, and we could rephrase this and say, how can you know your data if you can't see it? But I kind of like the play on words that shows. And this is something you hear a lot in the field of Dataviz or data visualization, that you need to start getting this stuff in front of you, viewing it in different ways in order to really pull out the lessons that can be learned from the data behind it. So if we were going to be coding today, there were 3 tangible benefits I wanted everyone to walk away from, or walk away with. And that was how to get the data you need, right? In a small workshop setting, that would be just pulling out certain custom endpoints, writing the stuff that you need. For this talk, it's going to be a little bit broader scope than that. And then we get into visualizations with JavaScript, and that's the fun, sexy stuff. The charts, the libraries, the woo-woo, the zoom, and we'll get into all of that as well. Now, we won't be actually coding them, but I'll point you to a lot of resources where you can pretty quickly get up and running depending on your skill level, and some different libraries, again, depending on where your skill level is, some might be better suited for you than others. And then finally, this very important discussion of, okay, now that we know everything there is to know about data visualization, thank you, 50 minutes, how do I do this? Do I approach this myself? Do I go ahead and code it out? Do I hire someone? Do I ask around, right? This is where we're going to end up, because my other hope is that when you leave here, you will have some very concrete things that you want to start to visualize in order to change the game for how you work. Now, when it comes to getting data, before we just start getting everything, we should begin to identify. So we should go in with a certain hypothesis in mind. Maybe we have a few questions, or we have an idea of what we want to get out of it. Data very quickly becomes bigger and bigger, especially if you have access to a lot of data or a lot of pieces of data sets that you're pulling in. And it can get overwhelming very, very quickly. So it's always a good idea to try to identify what it is that you're after. Now, that might shift and change, but you want to go in with something clear. So you're going to take everything, process that into some sort of trying to have a focus and intention, some questions in mind, and then these are going to be the different pieces of data that you'll pull out. Now, I don't think it will be hard to argue this point as we go through everything, but I think that it gets much bigger than just woo. right? So originally, we were just going to be looking at the WooCommerce endpoints and what we could do with customizing those. But really now, in a broader spectrum, we could talk about a lot more than just Woo, and it's important to, and hopefully you'll see that as we go on. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that sometimes you don't actually know what it is you're looking for until you see it. And I'll share some concrete examples that have happened for me. I just set up some charts, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this differently and go after that and that. And this is something that is true. So on the one hand, you do want to have questions in mind. You do want to have a general idea of what you're after. But you should stay flexible and open to where you could go with things. So let's get into this first point of getting our data, right? It starts with identifying what are the core WooCommerce API endpoints. So show of hands, how many of you here know what the WooCommerce endpoints are in general, give or take? All right, very smart folks. How many of you have actually used those in some sort of work? Nice. How many of you have customized them? Okay, we'll get there. For those who aren't familiar with it, these are the default WooCommerce endpoints, bonus points and stickers if you miss any, or if you notice anything I missed. I think they're all there. But you'll see a basic format of some of the stuff is nested within products, some of it is within reports, and then some of it you could specify by passing a specific ID and getting a certain piece of data back. Now, while all of these are really helpful, depending on what you're trying to build, I'd say that there's a subset of these that are more particularly relevant for us when we're talking about data visualization. So that would be our orders, maybe our refunds, the reports, and possibly webhooks, because then we could get interacting with other things that we might not want, or we might want to know what's going on, right? Now, this is great and super helpful, but as anybody who's used the WordPress REST API knows, or the WooCommerce one, it comes with a lot of data. So if I were to go and query the last order of the master course on my site, which was, I believe, a test run, you would get all this data back, right? Now, this can be helpful, but it could also be a little bit slow. It could be a little bit heavy, and I'll just pose it this way and look around with this answer. How many of you, when you go to use the WordPress REST API or WooCommerce, set up your own custom endpoints? What? Okay, I was really expecting more of you. Let's talk about this. There are some strong use cases for using custom endpoints, and in my experience, so my background is in education, so I have less experience with high production level apps working on them day in and day out. So I like to ask a lot of people who do, and almost every company I've talked with that is interacting with these APIs in some way, the WordPress or Woo one, they're writing their own custom endpoints. And one of the big reasons for this is that you could really narrow down how many queries you're making, but also in the terms of visualization, we could get very specific formatted data that will plug right into whatever visualization library we're using. So chances are, if you pick a certain framework or library to visualize things, you're going to want to reformat your data, even if you're taking the same content, and put it into a different way. So let me show you some pseudocode here of how we would go about setting this up. So there are internals within WordPress that let you register a route. Again, this is what we would all be coding along with if we were doing this as a workshop, but we'll kind of go a little bit more quickly. So you could see here that register REST route is setting up JS for WP v2 because, I don't know, I guess WordPress APIs, they just skip version 1 and go right to v2, right? So that's what I'm doing. I'm going right to v2. And then when that endpoint is called, when my order endpoint is called, then it's going to call my JS for WP get order function. And what that's going to do is take an ID, kick it back nothing if there is no ID matching. And if there is, then I'm going to take that order and push it into another order called my new customized or JS for WP order, which is very trimmed down. So notice all I'm getting is the date, the ID, the title, and the total. So my assumption with this is, okay, if I'm going to plot everything on a graph somewhere, I don't need all of these other pieces of data, right? Just give me what I need, keep it light, keep it clean. Again, pseudo-y code, but should kind of get you there. It's not hard to learn how to register an endpoint. And notice that WC get order lets you just pull in one query, although it'll do some things behind the scene, but you could get that data. I'm curious down the road, come approach me later if you think that there are even more efficient ways of getting data in WordPress than having to query something in its entirety. I don't know the differences between querying just an order versus getting very specific metadata if that's all you need, but then you might be making more. So I'm curious about these things, haven't thoroughly tested it. So then the end result is this. So if I hit my new endpoint, rather not going to wc/v2, but to my own custom one, then I'm going to get this stuff back nice and clean. So I would encourage you, if you do go down this route, then explore writing your own custom ones just to keep the query size smaller and to more specifically format what it is that you're going to be using. Now, there is this other option of getting data. How many of you write your own custom queries trying to pull data out of the database? All right, look around at these folks. Oh, yeah, you get some head nods, congratulations, I'm sorry, all of these things. And this happens for several reasons. One is maybe we know SQL, which is, anybody actually know SQL in here? Like, yeah, one, two, a few, okay. Yeah, a little bit of this, one of these. When your team has a person who could write SQL, that's amazing. But when your person has one team that could write SQL and you're 20 people, that gets really frustrating. So in some ways, this can be great. If you know that it's for a specific project, you're not going to have to go much outside of it, and you could kind of hard code something in, you'll get some, I don't know, is this nasty looking code? Maybe it looks good to you. Something a little bit like this so that you could pull out something specific. I believe that this is a query to get order totals. Again, the pros of this, it could be very specific. If you know what you're doing, it could be extremely efficient. However, the cons are really, we're not really writing too many SQL queries within WordPress, right? That's kind of not so much a best practice. But I will say, when we get down later into sorting through a lot of data, there's a lot of SQL queries going on. So it may be that you want this internally in WordPress, but in general, you're probably going to want to go down the route of seeing what you can pull out in a more an API format. Now, here's a really big point that we wouldn't be getting into in a workshop, but here I think it's super relevant, which is sometimes your data is not going to be from WooCommerce. So take a moment here and think about what data would you like to see for your work that is not necessarily in WooCommerce? Think about it for a minute. Now shout it out. What do you want to see besides WooCommerce data? Any suggestions? Any insights? Amazon orders. Yep. What? From Cloudflare. Okay, so other data, server-related data and stuff like that. What else? I'm sorry, Google Analytics. Yep. QuickBooks. Mm-hmm. Square data. What about non-e-commerce related at all? What might be relevant? Weather, yeah. Holidays. Yeah, and now we nailed it and we can move on. So cat pictures are the final correct answer. Take note of that. Sticker for that man. By the way, I have a bunch of these stickers and one that says learning deeply. You don't need the one with my face on it. But I'll share with you, for example, what I like to data mine from my own course, and it's this. So all of these things are points that I'm looking at on top of my trends of purchases or stuff coming straight out of Woo, right? And some of it can be really helpful to overlay, and some of it can be really helpful to see if there's correlations. And I'd encourage you to pause for another moment and think about what is all the data I could be doing, and have something open, because if you think of it, jot it down, and then later you'll be able to go back and see how can I pull these things in together. Now, I will note, I'm not going to really talk about this. I'll reference it again a little bit later. But there may come a time where you need some intermediary data store. So maybe it's just some huge Amazon SQL database. Maybe it's a NoSQL approach. But somewhere you may end up pulling out so much data regularly from different systems that it all needs to be dumped somewhere. And I'm not really going to get into those options, but I will point it out. Now, on the flip side of that, if you could just pull directly from each thing that you need and do the results as you need and not need to store it somewhere, then that may work for you. And it's really just going to depend on your solution. So again, just to think about, we're focusing mostly on WooCommerce here, but keep in mind that there is a lot of other data that will correlate with it. And that's really all I want to mention about getting the data, right? We know how to write a custom endpoint. We know that we could take something that's this big and specify it down. We could also go and write our own custom queries and either push it out through the API or just return it as some straight data that we're pulling from the database. And now we could turn to the really fun stuff, which is all the different visualization options. Now, before we do that, though, I think it would probably be a good idea for us to step back and talk about some just data visualization basics. And I'm going to kind of do some paraphrasing, pulling from a really good resource. And we'll talk about Tableau a little bit later, but they have a great white paper, and you can go to their site and download it. And we're going to come back to one of them because they are one of the great data visualization services. But just like all of us that are trying to become authorities in our industry, they're also writing a lot of great content and trying to get your email to download this PDF, which is actually very worth it. And I'm going to talk about some things in there because there are rules, there are best practices within data visualization, and it's not all just pie charts and bar graphs. So it does help to develop some of your literacy around this. And it's going to be stuff that you'll go, oh yeah, that makes sense, but we were not necessarily taught it depending on our background. So the first thing that they point out is, does your visualization actually answer your question? Now, there are a lot of times we may be going into something, we're like, okay, I want to see these trends over time, right? And I'm going to plot them all out on a graph. So maybe I have a couple different types of products, and I could chart and see, okay, I could see that these went up here, these went down here. But if you look at this chart, can you easily identify what the overall trend of all sales are? It's a little tricky. So one of the things that they talk about in data visualization is that if we shift from something like this to something like this, we now have a stacked area graph. And this is going to show us not just the differences between sales. I'll go back again, or you could see it up there. But it'll actually stack them so that we could see total trends. So some of the things that you'll see are, some of the things you need to look for are, is this piece of data visualization that I'm looking at actually answering my question? Because if my question is overall trends, then that first chart is less helpful than this one. We could take it even a step further, and this one is doing the same thing, but in a slightly different format, right? So now we could see overall trends. We could also see individual ones at the same time. So the general rule of thumb is that if you're looking for trends over time, use something like a line, area, or bar chart. These are pretty standard, and when you start to deviate away from them too far, two things happen. One, you may start to misrepresent your data. Once you get too many accesses and too many data points, if you're not clear with what you're doing, it can go awry. The other thing is that you can have too much there, and it's just not clear what you're trying to demonstrate. And then the third option is if you put in the wrong type of chart, you're actually not demonstrating what you wanted at all, and you're quite far from it. So another little tidbit is to use bar graphs for comparison. And this should make a lot of sense, right? If we wanted to compare the top 10 oil-consuming countries, something like this would make sense. So you could see the amount of size. Also notice the use of labels. Labels can be super helpful. And now I want to shift a little bit from, okay, this makes sense, right? But it's not just what type of graph you use, it's how you design it as well. So they've run through these really cool series of taking a graph that is not very clear and making it better and better and better. So take this for example. It's showing different people how well they scored over different times of the year, right? And one of the things they say about this is that it's really tough to read. Can you identify why it's tough to read? Yep. It's not the font size, it's the fact that it's sideways. So just doing this to it helps quite a lot. But we could do even more if we drill down a little bit further. So this chart here is showing us whether people have hit their quota or not, right? So we could see at a quick glance, wow, just by color alone, these people have not hit their quota. What this is showing is it's showing how much they achieved and then what their actual quota was. So what it suggests is that sometimes when we want to understand two pieces of data, we often just put them next to each other and then try to let our brain process it. But the benefit of data visualization is that if we put things in the right format, then our brain doesn't need to work to process. So for example, if you were to look at this chart here, David Ward, 4 down, how far over his quota is he? Jesse Alexander, who didn't hit quota, how far below? Exactly. Right? This is really difficult to tell. What about now? So now what we've done is instead of putting two charts side by side, we've put them together. And this is something that you could do. So you could be taking two different pieces of data and start playing with, is there a correlation here? Is there a pattern? Now this one's really obvious, but it works for lots of different types of data. And what this design approach suggests is that rather than having things side to side and having you try to compare the differences, overlay them over top of each other. Again, this should make sense, right? It should be super clear, but when you start pulling up a bunch of charts and sorting through data, real quickly you end up with stuff all over the place. So you have to be conscious about how you're digesting it, how you're designing it. Now we could go even one step further. Now if you didn't know much about data visualization, you may have been able to figure out how to get here. But then there is a whole subset of different types of charts that we don't commonly use. So one, for example, is called the bullet chart. So what this does is show their quota in a fixed line and then shows what they actually did as the bar or area graph. Now it's really easy to identify exactly where that quota was and how far above and below it they were, right? Now if we were to do this as an exercise, which would be a fun part of the workshop, right? Here's a bunch of data, give me the best way to see it. Unless we knew that bullet graphs were a thing, how would we end up here? We'd end up here by going and reading this white paper. Okay. So, all that said, I would really recommend studying data visualization. Deeply, don't know about that because you're not going to get back to development work likely because it is a huge and deep field. But if this is somewhere where you're in either a developer position where you might be implementing these things, if you're in an owner position where you might be looking over these numbers and having to make assessments, or if you're just part of a team that's trying to become more data-driven, you should take the time to learn data visualization or just data basics. So one of the best place, I think, to go is a company, Udacity. So Udacity is really at the forefront of online education for really advanced tech. They have a self-driving car program. They have a self-flying car program. They have an artificial intelligence program, deep learning, no WordPress, but they're very focused on these things. And they have a great data visualization track that has some very introductory stuff that anybody could go through without much background. And then they have some deep dives that get really deep if you want to actually go into this field for real. So I would suggest going and checking out some of their content. Again, it's really high quality, and I've had a chance to work with them. Great team. So there's that option. Now that's going to take some time. You're going to be setting some time apart to get through that thing. A quick win and a super great presentation that I hope all of you go out and watch took place at WordCamp Europe earlier this year from the wonderful Kadam. So Adam White worked at Boku, which did a lot of data visualization out of Boston, I believe, right? And so he shared a lot of what he's picked up as working with them, but also just on his own through his own studies. It only has 2 votes on WordPress.tv. This is an amazing talk. And unlike myself, he has a bit more background in this, so he can go into a little bit more depth and talk about it. And I really suggest, if you haven't seen this talk, to go ahead and check it out. So with that said, a little bit of a background on some things about data visualization, knowing that it matters what type of chart you pick, knowing that it matters how you design it. With all of these things said, we can shift, into looking at some specific data visualization tools. And now we get to the good stuff. So we'll start off with just JavaScript visualization libraries. And there are tons of them. Yeah? Anybody ever use a JavaScript library of some sort? Charty, animation. Anybody ever do charts without a library? That man. I just picked a few. There are so many, and I had a fun time going through as many of them as I could and trying to play around with them and figure them out and see, oh, which one do I like and this and that. But I think that with these few mentions, that you'll get a pretty good wrap on what is generally out there, what are some pretty easy go-to ones that you could work with, as well as where you could start searching for alternatives around, right? You know how to search for a term, and then what other options exist for this. So these options I'm going to talk about are Chart.js, the Google Developer Charts, the library D3, and HighCharts. And like I said, this by no means represents all of them, but I feel it's a pretty good mix and introduction. Has anybody worked with one of these before? Cool. All right, let's start off looking at Chart.js. Chart.js, I believe, I might be wrong, seems to be the go-to charting library right now in JavaScript. So it's able to do a lot of different types of animations. The things that you see playing here is basically a smooth and a straight line graph, different pieces of data. You can animate them. All of this is really built in and easy, and all of it is going to be something that with the right formatting, you could ship your API stuff from WordPress directly into here, and it can begin to calculate and work stuff out for you. It's not a very high learning curve. So if you have some comfort with JavaScript, I don't know, maybe you took somebody's master course and you're like, yeah, I know that now, then you should not have a hard time picking this up. If you're looking for a basic kind of vanilla chart library that you could either brand for your own use or that you could get up and running quickly with, or that you could go out and hire other developers to work on easily, I think that this is an easy win. Anybody use this one specifically? Okay, look around. If you want to use it, hold your hands up again. These are the experts in the room. Go ask them. They'll do it for free right here as you sit. All right, here's another one. This is the Google Charts. Let me make sure that animation started. Yeah, there we go. Google Charts. If you've used Google Analytics, this is all the stuff behind the scenes. And I think it looks pretty nice. It's definitely, I think, a step up in terms of what it takes to begin integrating with it. So I think the learning curve is a little bit higher, and the initial WTF is going on here is a little bit more. Anybody ever worked with Google APIs before? Right? They work eventually, right? But maybe, I don't think it's just me. Sometimes you have to kind of know what you're doing, or you have to get familiar with how they're running things. And I don't think that this is any different. Has anybody worked with these specifically? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. What do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways? Okay. Yeah. Again, free chart developers here. Use them for your resource. Now, when would I suggest using this? I think if you're already in a Google integrated environment, or you're with somebody that is used to seeing these kind of charts, or you're going to start pulling in things side by side, or you're already familiar with the Google platform, or you think that you could pull in devs that are familiar with it, then again, this is an easy win. If someone were to ask, hey, which one should I use? I'd probably recommend Charts.js. A little bit simpler, I think, to get up and running with, and a few more cool kids using it. So then we get to D3. And D3 is when things get crazy. This is when we get beyond just doing simple bar charts and things, and we start really getting into complex data types. Remember our bullet graph that we saw before? Well, this is a bullet graph with a segmented line graph on top of it, and area graphs within area graphs. I don't know, is this helpful to read to anybody? Can anybody make sense of what's going on here? Or is it just pretty and that's enough? Yeah. A little bit? Okay, so I want to just show you a bit of a range. So this is one of the things, this is kind of the more basic level of what D3 can do. We could also do really cool things like this. So have you ever used ClickFunnels in Google Analytics, and you've seen kind of this sort of animation? This could be something that's really, really valuable to a client. I mean, this looks like tens of thousands of dollars of work, right? And you just pulled some JSON information and figured out their flow, and it did the rest for you. So if you're in a position where, I'm going to be mostly talking to as store and as business owners, a little bit less as developers. But in this case, as a developer, if you could get some beautiful looking charts that answer very specific questions that your client has, we're talking boku bucks, y'all, which hopefully you're already charging because you're at WooCommerce, right? But let's double it. Why not? Because now we're doing data visualization. I will say, though, be careful offering data visualization as a service just because you think it would be cool, because you're going to get in over your head real quick. That said, make them some sexy charts, see where it goes. This is another chart. This is not that difficult to make, but I think that it's a really interesting one. It's called a slant chart. So if you've ever wanted to see if something has gone up or down, normally people would put that on a line graph, and we'd see what we saw before, right? All this data of, okay, it goes up, it goes down here, but it's a little tricky to tell. So this is one of the simplest visualizations that you could very easily see, did Sphere sell more or less than the month before? And you could see kind of that angle and approach, and then you can begin to map a bunch of things. So if I just feed the right JSON data from my WooCommerce endpoints in, I can get some slant charts like this. Again, this is another super easy win, and I think that this shows off, whereas Some of the past ones I showed you were really like cool looking and animated. This is simple and to the point, and sometimes that's really what you're after, right? If you want to get started with D3, the learning curve is not that simple. Has anybody, hold on, hands again of D3 folks, who's used it? How many, did you find it easy to use, or was it a little difficult? A little iffy, right? And these are smart people. They're answering all the questions, yes. Luckily, Front-End Masters has got you saved. Now, quick side plug, I just did a JavaScript for WordPress course for Front-End Masters, and it's on their site as a workshop, so check that out while you're there. But this is probably the definitive online course for getting started with D3, and Shirley Wu does a fantastic job. Oops, hold on. I thought that was a video we're going to see here. Go there. If you don't already have an account, if you're into online learning and that sort of thing, Front-End Masters, in my opinion, is probably one of the top consistent teaching JavaScript online learning sites. And they have a pretty low monthly fee, same as everybody else is charging. And they have some pretty amazing professionals coming in. So if you want a D3 course, if you want to jump into it, take the time to work through her workshop. It's a couple hours long, but you'll really get comfortable, because what happens with D3 is they have some cool examples that you're going to copy and paste, and then you're going to struggle with trying to go from that example working to how do I plug my data into it. And once you get there, you're like, yeah. And then they're like, what happens when you click here? I want something else to happen. You're like, and that's when it gets really hard, right? So once you get set up, it's kind of okay, but to really be able to play with it and bend it is a whole nother level. And I don't have a slide up here for this, but the D3 team actually developed D3 charts. Has anybody heard of D3 charts? So what this is it's a library that basically lets you build charts. So it's not a ready-made chart that you plug your data into, but if you're building out a dashboard and you want to have reusable components, like I want to have an axis every time, I want to have a bar animation, I want to have points plotted, it basically has all that built in, and then you just configure it, and it pulls all the pieces together and visualizes it. So if you are in a point where you're going to be getting into building dashboards and things like that, I'd also suggest checking out the D3 charts, because it'll let you save a lot of code. Rather than having to execute the same thing every time, it's going to be a little bit more performant that way. All right. Last up on the list here is not a picture. Oh, yeah, there we go. GIF. So this is high charts. Has anybody used high charts? Oh, I want to talk to you. Hold on. Who are you? 1, 2, 3. OK. Can you all come talk to me later? This is the one I haven't used, but it's really pretty. And that's how I make decisions. So let's all go use this one. And look at those dotted things. I don't know. It's beautiful. We should be looking at that. So if you're doing projections, for example, right, when would you want to use something dotted? If it's hypothetical, if you're not sure, maybe it's charting it out in the future. And again, that could be really easy to tell the difference with. So this is kind of the simple end of what it does. We then can get into things like this, where you have drill down charts. So this can be really, really helpful. Woo has this, right? In basic reporting, can't you click in and see something? Well, it does now. Yeah, right? Now it can. From what I've looked at with this pretty, I think that it has a pretty easy approach to get up and running with. Again, more complex than something like Chart.js, but if you have your data formatted right, and it's really well documented, they have pretty good stuff. And again, there are a few people here who have played with it. What are your thoughts on this one? Yay? Not so much? The one thumbs up. We're all going off you, man. Thanks, buddy. Okay. Then we get into this sort of thing. Anybody ever have to chart maps? Would anybody like to be able to chart maps if it wasn't something too difficult to do, right? So this is something that's really helpful, and I want to point out this for 2 reasons. One is that what you'll often see with maps is this straight color fill, right? You'll use a gradient to show this stuff is darker here, it's lighter here, that shows more there. When I was doing the reading, they really suggested with map overlays to always show 2 different types of data correlation. So one is we're showing location, and the other is going to be size. And a lot of people like to, or suggest that showing a sized bubble can be more helpful than a gradient. Some people said the opposite, so I'm not really sure what way to go there. But this has a really robust map library, so you could do all sorts of things with maps, including drawing your own boundaries with some of their tools pretty easily. So if you wanted to create your own custom maps, and have that looking super fresh, they've got you covered. So once again, here are just the 4 kind of go-to ones that I've played around with a bit. Folks here have used them, and I think they kind of go in order of complexity. Charts.js and D3, if you're looking for some libraries to know as an agency, you cannot go wrong with these. D3 has been around for a while, and it's not going anywhere. Charts.js is a little bit newer, so we'll see how that goes, right? JavaScript world, who knows? But I think at this point, pretty good options. So with all of that said, and with all of these, there's a lot more. So if you just go Google top 10 JavaScript libraries of 2017, you'll find out how I did my whole presentation. No, I'm just kidding. But there's other good ones out there. And the other thing about them is that outside of the ones I showed you, they start to get really specific, right? So they start to niche down. Oh, we just do maps, or we just do like force tree graphs a certain way, right? So if there's some specific type after you read that nice white paper, that you want to know how to do this type of graph, this would be really good, then you may find something specific for your application. Now, all that said, you might not actually want to code out your own data visualization, right? It's fun and it's pretty, and maybe if we have a small application, maybe we're just thinking of 3 dashboard widgets of very specific pieces of data we want to visualize. But that's often not the case, especially when we talk as business owners, right? You saw just my example of how many pieces of data I'm pulling in. 1,000 students progressing through hundreds of different videos, different price points for stuff, people signing up through different specials, how long they're active, whether they sign up for study groups, like all of these type of things come together, and it can be a lot to try to roll your own. So something happens between, hey, we want to see this very specific data, let's just throw up something real quick, and we really need to get into data analysis, let's go to a visualization service, right? So I'm going to just point out one big one for this point, and that's this one which I referenced before, and I think that from talking to people even here at WooConf, a number of the bigger groups are already using it, and it seemed like when they compared it to other folks out there that this was pretty good. But most of the other ones out there are going to do similar type things. So, oops, no. I'm just going to let this play in the background. You could tell by all the professionals, this is very enterprisey, right? It must cost a fortune. And that does bring up a point of, at what point is this kind of tool really worth it for your company? And this is when you're dealing with so many metrics that you really can't get through them all, and there's no way that you could take the time to code out every single thing and explore it. This is also for people who probably know what they're doing. So when you get to the level of you have this much data, the other thing I didn't mention, you just saw that they could pull from different types of databases, different SQLs, different things like that. So when you're at that level, this is something that may be a great option. Now, what's also going to happen when you're at this level is you're probably going to get into some sort of consulting or hiring outside staff and help. Because getting up and running with D3, not too bad. Getting up and running with this, if you've never done this, and so many people in this community, right, they didn't go to business school, they didn't go to data visualization school or something like that. So this can be a lot to learn. And I think that from the few folks that I've talked to that are using it, they felt it was pretty helpful to either have one of those wicked smart people on board your team that just somehow knows everything because they descended from outer space, or that you have somebody that you bring in to help you with it. Either way, if your company is at this point, at the end I'm going to have some suggestions of folks here that you should go talk to. And congratulations, you've got those big problems to solve, right? The big problems. So that said, I've never used this. This is not applicable to me. I'd love to have a company so big that I got somebody else doing this. But besides the prettiness of the charts, there are some tools specifically for WordPress that I do want to mention and that I do use and I'm a pretty big fan of. So the first one is User Insights. Has anybody ever heard of User Insights? Yeah, brought it home. Oh man, you've ruined it. One person. I love this plugin, and nobody seems to know about it. The plugin developers kind of came up out of nowhere. It's a single-page app built in Angular and also Metric. Folks heard of Metric? Yeah, a little bit more there. So let's break these down and talk about them. So User Insights I found because when I started my course, I wanted a way for students to collaborate locally. So I wanted to be able to find out where are my students on a map and how many of them are. So WordPress plugin for whatever your problem is, right? And here it is, User Insights. It's a paid plugin, but it very quickly let me see at a glance, not just in a table view, only pull up city and region and everything, but I could also see them on a map and drill down and see who they were. So this was really exciting to me. I bought this plugin right away, and I was actually hoping that I could get this on the front end of my site so that the students, if they're logged in, could see it as well. And that wasn't really possible because of how it was built with Angular, and it couldn't really be decoupled and put on the front of the site outside of that whole interface. But it was really helpful for me. And man, I began to feel kind of uncomfortable because now I had so much data on my students. I saw where they were in the world. I can almost tell if they're using a VPN to get around it. I could see when they last logged in, how many videos, oh well, I'll get to the videos in a second. And this is to bring up something that at some point, like, you might start to feel uncomfortable with how much data you're mining and what you're really looking at, right? So we want to be cautious. We want to be careful about privacy. Now, none of this data was stuff that I hacked from them. Well, they didn't know that they were being tracked when they logged into my site. And that's what made me feel a little queasy, right? Because we all know that we're being tracked everywhere we go and being listened to, right? And some of us are a little uncomfortable with that. So when I started doing it to my own students, it made me feel a little uncomfortable. So I'll mind, just keep in mind that there may be places where you start to feel a little weird about that. But in the big picture, it was really helpful. And I reached out to these folks and I said, hey, this is so helpful, but I want more. Right, the best user. Can you build more custom functionality for me? And they did. So I use LearnDash as an LMS, and it wasn't hard for them to plug in and say, I could pull in now all my LearnDash data, and I could say, who's in a certain city, and okay, I wanted to check that I wasn't showing any emails. These are some of my best students. I wanted to give them credit. I could say, okay, who's completed more than 100 videos and is in town? Or who logged in the last 2 weeks and is going to be in a town where I'm speaking at a WordCamp? Because now I could go send them a message and know that they're going to be probably interested, right? I could even see if they've clicked it. Oh, you can't see through it. We'll get to that later. So this data was really helpful for me. And then it led me to all these other things. Well, okay, now I can see where my students are in the course. Maybe this data should be in my CRM too. So it wasn't until I installed this plugin, began working with it, that I then went out and finally started paying for Zapier and got all of the same information that I was seeing in this chart into ActiveCampaign. So now my emails can be specified down to the video of how far people have watched, when they last logged into the site, how active they are, and all of this other data. Now, I'm still having some issues with an ActiveCampaign visualizing what I want to see, so we'll get to other options down the road. But this is a great example of it wasn't until the data was in front of me that I began looking at things differently. I began asking different questions, and I began changing things so that I could have a more complete picture. And all of that came out of folks asking, hey, can you tell me who's in my town? I said, I don't want to look all that up. Let's see how we could automate this and go from there. And it grew and has been really successful. So if you do use either WooCommerce or you like to track your users and see where they are, if location stuff is helpful, or if you use LearnDash. Does anybody do online courses in here? Hey-o, cool. I'd suggest it, and they have an add-on for that. Now, the other one is Metric. And I signed up for Metric in the last week while I was working on this course, in small part to Brian Richards down here, my man up front row. And Metric is, I think, the only SaaS go-to commercial service that plugs into WooCommerce and automatically starts giving you reporting data. Right? Am I right on that? Yeah, okay. So let's give some credit to Bryce Adams, an amazing chap who, I think this is a picture of him last year, right? Was that 2 years ago? Last year. So he left WooCommerce and went to start this product. And for anybody who's followed his blog, it's been a pretty cool story. He's also one of the advisors to my master course. So I got a chance to ask him a lot of questions. And man, this guy's like, oh, we could do it the WordPress REST API. We could turn lights on and off. We could drive machines. We could do all sorts. And I'm like, oh, man, OK, I was just going to build a chart. But that's cool. So has anybody met this fellow? Cool. You're lucky. If not, go now and follow him on Twitter and keep track of the stuff he's doing. A bright person and definitely an influencer in this field to keep an eye on. So what Metric does is you log in, you sign up, and it just gets all your data from WooCommerce and starts displaying it. And one of the things that it's really big on, and I've talked to a number of people here whose businesses have gotten so much better just because of the churn reporting. So one of the things he does is plug in with Prospress's subscriptions, and you can begin to track, okay, when are people leaving? When are people staying? Now, churning is such a big deal that I literally, when I left Treehouse, I was so exposed to all of this data around education and how long people last and how to get people past 3 months. I was so burnt out on all of this. I was like, you know what? Buy my course once and I'm done. It's fine. I don't even want to have to worry about recurring subscriptions, right? A year later, when I'm still trying to do the same course and pay for my life with it, I said, okay, this is not the best long-term goal. I need to change things around and look at some other models here, right? So it wasn't surprising to me when I logged in to Metric for the first time and I saw something like this. Now, these are the sales from my master course, which only is sold 3 times a year, right? So I do a big enrollment, I shut the doors, I focus on just those students, I focus on creating more content, and I don't have to worry about things like how WooCommerce is broken or I did something wrong or have to refund and anything like that. It lets me just focus in on my course, come back to do this. Now, I knew that the figures would look like this, right? There's complete drop-off. There's no sales in between because part of my mentality was I don't want to worry about subscriptions and I don't have anything else to sell, man. I could barely finish this master course. There's no way I'm doing anything else on top of it. But then when I looked at this, I said, you know what, that's not okay. I need money in between here. I don't know what it is, I just need it. And I also want to get more out of this tool. So one thing that occurred to me really quickly is one of the things I started to do was I run a cohort program now, right? Because I saw that so many students didn't complete the course, maybe they need some help and encouragement. So every week we check in, we have video discussion groups, all of this. And I realized, okay, these video discussion groups, I can set them up with bookings, and I can make this a product, and then I can begin to track who's coming to these study groups and who's not. Because one of the things I want to be able to communicate to my students is how much value they've gotten out of the course. So a very simple thing, you buy it once, how many videos you watch each time, right? It becomes more valuable. But there's also things like how many sessions have you attended, how much interaction have you had, and then eventually down the road, how many projects have you taken on that then compensate and make you more than you were making before. So this is a very small example of how looking at this data made me realize, okay, if I could get some more information in here, and I turned to a WordPress or a WooCommerce plugin to help me see that. And then that just kind of snowballed and went a few other places. So, okay, now we've got to integrate bookings with Zoom, and that's not data visualization, that's just integration. But now Metric also has a Slack integration and Intercom. Is anybody familiar with Intercom? Intercom is a service that will let you send updates, like if there's a new video out in the course or if somebody hasn't logged in, reminders, and it'll do it via text, it'll do it in-app, or it could do email. So Intercom is something that my friend Troy Dean has been saying I should get on for a while. He runs WP Elevation and does a fantastic job with student engagement, staying in touch, and he's a big fan of Intercom. And you know what? Metric hooks in with Intercom. So I was like, okay, now's the time to go do it. So another one of those things is as you get deeper into these tools, you begin not only seeing what they could do, you ask new questions, you see other integrations that are offered, and you could start leveraging those as well. And from there, once I pull that into Metric, through talking with Bryce, he says, oh, you know what? I have another product called Engage, which is going to then go ahead and start doing automated emailing to people based on certain conditions that will help you get more traffic, retention, all of these things. And it's all automated behind the scenes. So now I have all of this data being sucked in, figured out, Engage is doing its thing. I'm still dumping stuff out into ActiveCampaign, and it's circling back and doing its thing as well. So look at this. These are two WordPress services. One is a plugin, one is a SaaS model. And I can say just from my own experience of just installing these, so many new avenues opened up. I now feel happier with my life, supporting myself and family, just from installing a couple plugins. Right? I went in with some idea of what I could solve. I explored it and I said, oh, these are other options. And I almost guarantee that the same thing is going to happen to you. It might not be through these two plugins, it might be through different things, but there's definitely a way that this is going to begin to open up new doors for you. And almost everything you read about data visualization will tell you this. Whew, nailed it. Okay, visualization options with JavaScript. I think we've done a pretty good job, right? We talked about some basics, right? There are rules and principles to what kind of charts you should be using. Good design does matter. Just because it's a bar graph doesn't mean that you can't put some attention and thought into it. And then finally, we talked about some very specific WordPress ones, right? So I'd really encourage you, if you're running subscription services and you don't have Metric, go sign up. Free trial, check it out. It'll pull all your data in, and I think become pretty valuable right away. Now we've got to talk about integrating, and we're going to keep this pretty short and sweet. Excuse me. All right, so the first thing is do you actually need help with this? Do you need help just figuring out what you need help with? How many in here would love some help with data visualization in their company, in their service? Really? Hold on, let me ask this question again. How many of you would like help with data visualization in your company? There's one guy in the back, two here. Okay, a few more. Okay. Let me tell you, you probably do want some help. And if you don't think that you need any help, you might not be looking deep enough yet. And you might want to talk to some people who are doing this a bit more. Now, it might be, you know what? We don't need to do any more research. We have a problem. So once you hit a problem, sometimes you stop and it's like, we just need to address that. So let me ask it this way. Anybody have a problem with data visualization that they're already aware of? Okay, a few. So this is the kind of first thing when it comes to integration. Before you even talk about building something out, and we're all coders, right? So we want to go download D3 and just start building right away. But it's always worth it. So many of the companies I talked to here this weekend, and I've been asking everybody, I've had some conversations with some of you in the room of like, hey, so how you doing Dataviz? What's going on with that? And I lost my train of thought. They're all great? I don't know. Let's go to the next one. You then want to ask yourself, is this something that we should be coding? Right? Do we have somebody internally that could do this? Now, the answer isn't always going to be no. I know I kind of put it out like if this is something that is really complex, you might want to either outsource it, you might want to get a service, maybe you don't want to be coding it yourself. But it is pretty handy to have an in-house dev who can pump out some data visualization. Now, you want to be careful, like I said, offering this out as a service or completely overcommitting to what you can do. But if you have a targeted thing and you have the data behind it, it isn't that much more work if you've gotten that far to code something out yourself. And even just to give yourself a little dashboard somewhere that you can see that is going to be valuable. And I think the more we do kind of early on to get into that, the more engaged we're going to feel with it. So we're kind of getting towards the close here, and I want to encourage all of you to build a more data-driven business. Now, personally, I'm a little bit concerned about AI in the next 2,000 years taking over and killing all of us. So I think that it has its place, but there should also be some gut. There should also be some intuition involved in this. But gut and intuition can only get so far before our brain starts to melt from too many problems, too many data points, not really going on, feeling overwhelmed. So when we can get all that out of that space and into something that's a nice pretty chart, we're going to feel better, emotions are better, relationships improve, health and wellness, you start looking shinier. All of these positive benefits of data-driven businesses come out. And the other cool thing that happens with this is you begin to feel more comfortable with the decisions you're making. Because what may very likely happen at first is you just prove yourself right. You said, you know what, we had an intuition about this. We thought we were doing this right. Turns out we nailed it. High fives all around. Like, you're really happy. Nothing changed. You just realized that the data kind of proved you right. But then it also may be that, hey, we have to make some changes. Our whole model is different. I ran a web agency years ago, and it turned out that I was going the completely wrong direction. Hired somebody to come in, and he said, no, you should be doing this instead. And yeah, that didn't end up keep doing it, but listen to his instructions. So we do have to be aware that sometimes we have to take it in a completely different direction. Now, the thing I want to close with here is that, like I said, I've been going around and talking to a lot of different folks here about data visualization, and I just want to highlight a few people that I would encourage you to talk to as well, in addition to the folks in this room, because you're all obviously interested in this topic. Where's my SiteGround folk? Don't worry, you'll still get a mention even though you're down at the desk. So SiteGround has done some really interesting research around return on investments from attending WordCamps. Anybody who's been to a number of WordCamps and has seen SiteGround and grow over the years You're probably familiar with them talking about it and saying, hey, it's really hard to track, but it is something that we can have some metrics on and begin to look at, even down to the point of visualizing it, even if, remember, Excel is still data visualization. So if that's something interesting to you, I know there are other people who have written about this topic, but folks that are here, and we had some good conversations around that. Another host I'll just mention quickly, Bluehost. They have one of the highest paying affiliate payouts in the kind of small WordPress hosting world. They have some great tracking with that. They also just overhauled their entire kind of internal setup system and have some stuff going on as well. Also, if you're in the industry of building plugins and you want to begin looking at how can you get data consciously. The folks at Woo were talking about this. I know the folks at Bluehost and a number of other hosts as well have discussed this. And how do you pull in a lot of metrics of data about technical things and keep track of it all? Go give a holler to the folks at Prospress. Not only are they trying to address some of this stuff internally, but in just dealing with running the subscriptions plugin, they've come across a lot of things with that as well. And if you know Brent or anyone on the team, these are also the folks behind Robot Ninja. And I think in some ways we could almost even count that as some form of data visualization too, because if we're running automated tests, and if you saw Brian's breakout session on testing, then you'll know that even those tools can begin to visualize your data for you, right? They're visualizing where your tests failed and where they succeeded. So another good group to talk to. Skyverge is doing this as well. They're one of the folks that are kind of more at that Tableau, like really high data set level. So if you think that that might be something intriguing, go ahead and ask them about Overlord and their experience with working with some of these bigger data points. If you want to just have your brain melted and have people talk to you about, no, it's really, I need to track orders per second because we need to queue the people because this site is so big, we just need to control all of this and we need to pay attention to really big data stuff. Talk to any of the big folks over at MINDSIZE, and they've got the brain t-shirts on. If you saw Zac's talk earlier, we get confused all the time. I'm not Zac from MINDSIZE. That's the other one. If you see us next to each other, hard to tell us apart. But different folks. So I definitely suggest going and talking to any of them about data visualization. Now, I haven't had as many talks with the folks at AUTOMATTIC, but they have a Dataviz team. So your homework on my behalf, por favor, is go talk to them. You know, real slide, don't be like Zac sent me. Ask them about all their data, how they track it all, what they're trying to do, and then come back and tell me, right? Because I'm very curious. I don't know why their team isn't here. Maybe next year we'll see them. But there are a lot of folks on the team that are either building stuff out that might have to do with some of this or just know what's going on. I had a good talk with some of them as well. The last honorable mention I want to give here is Codable. Anybody Codable fans? You could totally steal my retirement idea, but I'm just going to start an agency built on top of Codable. They do all the work. I forward them the emails, and I just like fade off into the sunset. It's going to be beautiful. You're welcome to steal that idea. But I was just talking with these folks, and they run a WordPress outsourcing company that's pretty high caliber, and I've known them since they started it, and it's just been interesting to track. So I just walked up, and casually, it was like, hey, so what are you guys doing for data visualization? And there's this long pause, and I was like, oh, did I come in the wrong time? And they're just like, man, do you want the long answer or what? It wasn't even, do you want the short answer? It was just like, stay here for a bit. And I did. I missed like 2 talks after that, listening to them go through all of the things that they've gone through in terms of visualizing their data, because they're doing some really complex things. Not only are they worrying about paying, they have payments, they have to track code bases, they have to track their customers, they have to track their developers, they have to track support, and most of this is all rolled into one system. And they've also gone through the process of trying to do this themselves, getting to a certain point, dumping out huge amounts of data into huge databases, then pulling it in through services like I showed you with the Tableau, but also have gone through hiring legit data analysis agencies to come in and help them. They talk about patience. They talk about months and months before you could really get to the data that you want. But man, you could feel the ease. You could feel the like, yeah, we're doing it right and we know it now. And if you see any of the Codable folks, especially some of them who own it, I would definitely recommend striking up some conversations, because we all want to be so big that we got Codable problems, right? Maybe not. Tangible takeaways. How many of you learned something about getting data for data visualization? Cool. How many of you learned about visualization options? And how many of you learned about integrating the data? Oh, yeah, we did so good. I'm so happy. I don't know why the slides are starting over. Dear God, what happened? Hold on. I came so close. Okay. Here's what I want to leave you with. Visualizing data is a meditation, very literally. Meditation is the practice of becoming focused. It's the ability to focus on a single or multiple things without being distracted by other things that are coming your way. As you begin to practice data visualization, you will enter into meditative states. Your brain will go into it. And the more you do that, the better you'll get at it and the more focused you'll be. So what I want to encourage you and leave you with is meditate so you can visualize data better. So the idea here is that as we develop our ability to be focused, as we develop our ability to visualize things in our head before they even come to screen, because we've learned these different techniques of data visualization, this is only going to benefit us and help us. Plus, we all get more calm and peaceful in the process. So thank you very much for attending this talk. If you have questions about data visualization, go ask somebody in this room. Go ask the people I mentioned. And as a very last resort, come talk to me. You can get all of the slides for this at javascriptforwp.com. Also, if you're interested in learning more or training your team on JavaScript, WordPress API stuff, that's kind of my jam, so you could get some discounts or check out my offerings there as well. Thanks, y'all.